Catholics, we believe that the Eucharist is truly Jesus's body and blood, soul and divinity, that it is true presence. And so today I'd like to share with you guys some Eucharistic miracles that just show and confirm Jesus's true presence in the Eucharist. Hi, I'm Rebecca Higgins, Youth Director for Catholic Nacogdoches. I have the pleasure of working with all the middle school and high school youth from all of the churches in Catholic Nacogdoches with the group called Shock. And this morning I have with you 4 of my children. They're going to listen to some of these awesome Eucharistic miracle stories from the book that I got, The Eucharistic Miracles of the World. It documents the Eucharistic miracles, provides pictures. It's a great resource if you're wanting to know and learn more of these miracles. Also, there's a website on it. And then afterwards, after we share some, I was going to have the kids share with us what their favorite one was that they heard today. So I have about 5 or 6 stories that I'd like to share with you. And the first one is about St. Anthony of Padua. And he lived in the 1200s. And to give a little backstory of St. Anthony of Padua, he was known as a very great, intense, well preacher. He preached really well. And one story is known about him that when he was preaching, the people in the church were not paying any attention to him. And so he said, I'm going to go out and I'm going to preach to the fish. Okay? And it wasn't preaching to the fish because they needed to be instructed and taught, but it was for the glory of God that his words be brought out and heard. Well, as he's preaching, the fish started coming and listening to him. And then all of a sudden the people came out and noticed and they started listening to him. So it was a great example of God speaking through him. Well, St. Anthony of Padua was with a man who completely denied the presence of Jesus, in the Eucharist. And this man said that he didn't believe. And St. Anthony made a bet with him. He said, we're going to take your donkey and we're going to not feed him for several days. So he's really hungry. And we're going to then try and see if the donkey will recognize Jesus in the true presence of the Eucharist. Well, they didn't feed the donkey for several days. St. Anthony of Padua stood on one side of the street with a monstrance with the consecrated Eucharist in it. And the man who owned the donkey stood on the other side of the street with a pile of hay. And they asked the donkey they released the donkey, and the donkey started walking over towards the hay because it was so hungry. Well, St. Anthony of Padua lifted up the monstrance with the consecrated host in it and said, "Come adore your maker." And in doing that, the donkey veered away from the food and went down over to St. Anthony of Padua with the consecrated Eucharist. And the amazing thing is that he also knelt down in praise of the Eucharist. The man immediately who doubted, no longer doubted, and gave praise to God and came to truly believe in the Eucharist being Jesus's body. Pretty awesome story. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah.
Me too.
Another one that I want to share with you guys is from Avignon, France in 1433. And this one is really awesome. So during this time, the King of France was fighting against some heretics who did not really believe. They were doubting and spreading that the Eucharist was not actually Jesus's body and blood. And the King of France actually felt like he was making progress and defeating some of these heresies and putting an end to it. And he wanted to celebrate. So he had an adoration set up so that they could go and adore the Blessed Sacrament in thanksgiving for some of the battling against these heretics. Well, during this adoration, Eucharistic adoration, a huge storm came and it started to flood, and the rivers by the town started to overflow, and so everyone had to escape quickly. So they left in the middle of adoration, just completely left how everything was, and they left. When they came back, there was 6 feet of water. They could only come back using boats. So they rowed to the church to try and see what had happened to the church building and what happened when they left adoration. So they rowed over in 6 feet of water. When they got to the church, there was a parted pathway they were able to walk on dry land up to the altar. On either side, there was 6 feet of water, and the water was parted. And when they got up to the altar, the water was parted around the monstrance that was holding the Blessed Sacrament as well. So that's pretty amazing how the water was kept away from the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. Another one is the oldest, I believe it's the oldest recorded Eucharistic miracle. It's from Lanciano, Italy. In 750 AD. And this particular one was when a priest who was having doubts on whether or not the Blessed Sacrament was truly Jesus's body and blood, was consecrating the host. And right after the words of consecration, the priest noticed that the host turned into actual flesh, and that the wine turned into actual blood. Okay, as a miracle. Immediately the priest no longer doubted that the Eucharist was truly Jesus's body and blood. But what's amazing to me is that, and the whole story, is that the body and the blood are still fully present and living to this day in 2020. It was just amazing. From 750 to this present day. They have done studies. In 1970, the Archbishop had studies done to evaluate and see what the Eucharist was by doctors that did not necessarily know, and scientists don't know what they were studying. And they found that it was actual living heart tissue from someone who had trauma done to them while they were alive. The blood was the same blood of the Shroud of Turin, the blood on the Shroud of Turin, and that there was no preservatives or anything put into this that would keep it in this existence. Also, the other cool thing is that the blood formed into 5 globules, and these 5 globules were different sizes, but each one, when they were weighed by themselves, weighed the same as all the others. So the small one weighed just as much as the big one, and the big one made just as much as the medium and the small one. And then when you put all 5 of the blood globules together, they weigh just the same amount as when they were individually done. So that's pretty cool in itself.
It's kind of
amazing. Mm-hmm. It was amazing.
What's a globule?
Globule is a blood glob, a blob of blood. Okay. Another fascinating one is a more recent one from 1991, and this is from Betiana, Venezuela. And a priest was having mass, and after the consecration, he took the consecrated host, the large one, and he split it in 4s, consumed one, and when he looked down, the other host, the part of the host, was bleeding. It was emitting blood, and it was bleeding. And when they studied a little further, they realized that the blood was not soaking through to the backside, but it was coming out of the center of the host. It's pretty amazing. And so then, of course, they decided that this was a Eucharistic miracle, and they honored it and would have adorations of it. Well, in 1998, another miracle happened. A man from New Jersey went to Venezuela to observe this wonderful phenomenon, okay, of the blood coming from the consecrated host. And as they opened the tabernacle to expose it for adoration, they noticed that there was flames surrounding the consecrated host that was emitting blood, just like the flames around the burning bush that Moses saw, that it was there, but it was not consuming the bush. These flames were not consuming the consecrated host. And they also then saw the consecrated host beating like a heart, which is amazing.
It's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm, it is weird. And they did studies on this as well, and they found that they were the same blood type, same everything from the consecrated host at Lanciano. This is awesome.
Yes.
This one is from Magoro, Italy, in 1604. And in 1604, there was a priest who was having mass, and it was during the Eucharistic procession to go up and receive the consecrated host, right? And there was 2 men who had mortal sin on their souls. They had not gone to confession, but they had grave mortal sin on their soul. And when they went up to receive the Eucharist, both of them, as soon as the Eucharist entered their mouth, they immediately spit it out onto the floor because the host were so hot and it burned their tongue. They spit the Eucharist out. Well, they realized we didn't go to confession and they were embarrassed, so they ran out and left. Well, the priest goes to pick up the host, and on the concrete floor where the host hit, the impression of the host was left on the floor of the church. They tried to wipe it off and wash it, and it didn't change it, which is amazing in itself there. And it's still to this day there. And the last one, yes, it would be cool to go see. The last
I
one,
bet they could jackhammer and nothing would happen. Yeah.
the last thing that I'd like to share with you is about two different saints, okay, that have had some really cool experiences with the Eucharist. And one is Saint Bosco, John Bosco. He lived in the 1800s, 1848 in Italy. And he was at Mass, and he was very devout. And as he was serving communion, he only had 8 hosts to be able to serve. But the 8 hosts served 360 people. So it multiplied. Jesus multiplied himself to feed the people, which is amazing.
Weird.
That happened to us.
And the last person I'd like to share with you today is about Blessed Mary of the Passion. And I just want to read a little bit about her. She lived in Italy from 1866 to 1912. So again, another fairly recent in our times. And Blessed Mary of the Passion, on her first communion day, her name was Mary Grace. She was 7 years old. And the child Jesus appeared to her with wounded and bloody hands and said to her, "People inflicted these wounds on me with their sins." From that moment, Mary Grace consecrated her life to the Eucharist and the salvation of souls. In another appearance that Jesus came to her and said, "I am the Eucharist to dispense grace and extend mercy, but I receive ingratitude, profanity, and sacrileges. The Eucharist is dishonored and nobody cares. My beloved, make reparation with your adoration done in my presence." Those words just kind of are sad, because how many times do we actually take for granted the true presence of Jesus being offered to us in the Eucharist
And
recognize that it is. In her life, she wanted to live just for the Eucharist and for Jesus. Her father then, though, insisted that she get married. So they had a civil marriage, but never a religious marriage. And on her wedding day, her husband came extremely sick. And so they never had a religious marriage. But she nurtured and cared for him the 8 months that he was sick. When he died, she entered a convent and dedicated her life to the Eucharist and to helping people to know, love, and honor Jesus in the Eucharist. She was a saint who ended up having the stigmatas. A wonderful life. I encourage you to look into her life as well. The Eucharistic miracles are amazing. They're awesome because it just gives us a glimpse of seeing what our human eyes can't see. And every now and then Jesus gives us a glimpse of his presence, which is awesome. So what would you like to share? Which one of these was your favorite that you heard stories today?
What is a stigmata?
Stigmata, for those of you that don't know, is the wounds of Jesus Christ. So she had the wounds of Jesus from the nails being in his hands as well as in his heart.
My
From
side?
the lance being in his side.
Okay.
So what was the Eucharistic miracle that stood out to you that you thought was really cool? Everyone be thinking about it.
The first one, that with the donkey, and also the impression on the rock floor or something.
So having the donkey actually go and follow
The Christ.
the Eucharist instead when he was starving.
He followed. He realized that it was God who made him, so he went to the Eucharist.
That's right,
Thanks,
Emma.
Emma.
You're
How
right.
about you, Keith?
I like the one where the Eucharist multiplied.
The multiplication
Oh,
of
I
you.
forgot about
Yes.
that one.
You know, that made me think of the story of Jesus with the multiplication
Yeah.
of the fish, the loaves and the fish.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that reminded me of that.
All right, Thomas, how about you?
I liked the multiplier one. I liked all of them, but the one that really stood out to me was the donkey one.
The donkey.
The one about the donkey, like
Yeah.
her. Like her, God, like she said, God created the donkey. Donkey realized it was God, went over to God instead of hay.
Yeah. And it was not in their normal nature to do that, was it?
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Jake?
And it was
The one
really
I liked
scary.
them all, but the one that stood out to me was the one in 1991. Whenever the people from New Jersey came to America and opened the tabernacle and it was on fire and it was still beating.
Yeah, so when the people in America went to Venezuela and saw that, because how amazing, because we know that it is Jesus's flesh, right? It's from his blood, from his heart. And to see it beating and being alive and not being consumed by a fire, pretty amazing. And he got pictures of it as well. So these were all wonderful and awesome stories to help us in knowing about Jesus through the true presence. I encourage you to, if you want to know more about Eucharistic miracles, to look up this book, The Eucharistic Miracles of the World. If you want more content like this, I invite you to like, follow, and share Catholic Nacogdoches on Facebook as well as on YouTube. God bless.